If you take out your message outline for today, we are finishing up our series called Rerouting. And it's a series, like I've mentioned, I've wanted to do for about a year. Whenever you go through really hard times and you just cannot understand why in the world am I going through this, usually as Christians we say, well, at least we can say, well, I know God's up to something. He's doing something in my life through this. I may not know what it is. And part of the purpose of this series is to highlight at least 9 things that God may be up to during really hard times in our life. And we've looked at some really tough things, shattered dreams, unmet longings, brokenness, the loss of control in our life, a fallen world, personal heartache, trials and suffering. We looked at trials 2 weeks ago, suffering last week. And today we look at failure. Failure. And just a personal word, I never want to do this series again. Please stop me if I think I should do this again. Every week, it's almost like God says to me, Seth, I know you can talk about this, but I want to see you take this back road first, then get up and talk about it. So today's message is called Failure. So guess where I've been this week? Oh my gosh. Failure. Of course, the purpose of all of the back roads is to bring us to eternal joy. And we get tastes of joy now, the full banquets to come, and there are different definitions of joy that we've gone through. Joy has always been a fuzzy to me until this series. So if you are also curious about that, you can go to our website and look back and listen to these messages. About a month or so ago, I was at an event, and I ran into a casual friend of mine that I don't see very often. I'm going to call him Randy. I've probably talked to Randy person to person maybe 4 times. I don't know, something like that. But I've known him for 10 years. And during those 10 years, he loves fantasy sports as much as I do. So we've been in the same fantasy baseball leagues, fantasy football leagues, fantasy basketball leagues. And but I rarely see him. And so as we were talking, face to face, as we were talking, he was asking me how my life was going. Of course, I was doing this series and experiencing these back roads. And so when he asked me, how you doing? I said, well, you know how life is. And he had a puzzled look on his face. I said, you know, sometimes there's blessings in my life and sometimes there's challenges. And it seems like to me right now I've been in a lot more seasons of challenges lately. And he was stunned. He said, really? He said, Seth, whenever I'm around you or in the fantasy sports world, I always think that you're always on top of things. And I started laughing. I said, oh my gosh, I never feel like I'm on top of things. That hardly ever happens. And he was just, really? I said, yes, you should follow me around for a few weeks. Then you would see. I said, most of the time it feels like I am over my head, that there's more being required of me than I have to give. More problems that need to be fixed than I know how to fix, and more relational issues to deal with than I know how to deal with. And he said, wow. And then he said, how do you keep going? That was the magic question. I said, well, I've been a slow learner of this, but I have learned the challenges in my life and the fallen world we live in, the difficulties with people, even just the difficulties with me, remind me that I am designed as a dependent creature. And I'm at my best when I am trusting God to do in me and through me what I can't do on my own. And I apparently have to be reminded of that quite often. But that gives me a hope. And the hope is that God can take dependent people who are trusting Him and don't necessarily feel strong, but in actuality feel weak. And just kind of have to move into their world anyway as best they can, whether it's with a cane, limping, leading with a limp, or feeling like you have a walker here. To move into the lives of people and problems. It is a constant challenge to me. Now, that's the little foretaste of today's message. The route to joy we're looking at here, number 9, is failure. the sting of failure. And the joy definition is moving, is that God is working into us. And this message is a little bit more directed to us men today than you ladies, although you feel the sting of failure too. But the sting of failure strikes at the very core of who a man is. Like you ladies, the core of your fear is rejection and being unloved or left behind or replaced. That's not the deepest fear of a man. The deepest fear, the deepest pain is failure. One of my favorite cartoons, let's go to that cartoon, Donna. So there's a poor husband sitting in the witness chair, and there's the prosecuting attorney, and said, "So you did wear the black socks with the white sneakers despite your wife's repeated objections." And there's just that awful look of the sting of failure. And when it comes to failure, and most of the time we think of failure, we think of the big things, a failed marriage or a failed career or some just awful personal failure. And that certainly is true of failure. But there are lots of different ways, smaller ways, that we can still feel like a failure without those gigantic things. What is God trying to do in me? He is trying to make me, and the metaphor for today is a hopeful warrior. A hopeful warrior. There are 5 enemies that we deal with in this world, and these will all be gone when we are in heaven. But until we get there, every day there are 5 enemies that come at you. Now, they come at you whether or not you're aware of all 5 of these. They come at you whether you're aware of only 2 of them or 3 of them. But you will feel this sense of battle going on in you. And so let's quickly look at these 5. Enemy number 1 is me. I am my own worst enemy. Romans 7 says, "I see another law at work in my members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my own members." Paul says in Romans 7, "The very thing I know I should do, sometimes I don't do. And the very things I know I shouldn't do, sometimes I do those anyway." And it just drives him nuts in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 8:1, he says, "But thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord." He gives us the grace to deal with this particular battle. Battle number 1 is me, my own self. Enemy number 2 is you. Or for you, that's all the people in your life. They have the same sin disease that you and I have. Paul says, "For you are still of the flesh," meaning the sinful human nature. "While there's jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving like ordinary men?" Now, if it was just these 2 enemies, that would be hard enough. Just trying to get along with people and trying to get my head around trying to be a blessing to people seems hard. But there's 3 more enemies. Enemy number 3 is Satan. Peter says, "Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." Now, I'm kind of hopeless when it comes to YouTube because there's something I like about watching lions attacking animals, and particularly people. I don't know why that is, but like I say, I'm my own worst enemy. Satan. What does the Bible say about Satan? It says he's a liar. And he's telling us lies about ourselves and about the world and about God every day. And it's not like he comes, to the front door and talks to us, but you hear that voice, that quiet voice in your head. And he's so subtle. Satan is the one that creates chaos in our lives and miscommunication. And wrestling with our own human nature, even as hard as that is. Enemy number 4, the ways of the world. The ways of the world that try to pull us away from the narrow road that Jesus talked about walking. And this, you see this on TV shows, you see it in movies, you see it in ads, you read about it on blog posts, you see it on the newscasts, you see it in magazines. It's almost impossible to not be affected by the aroma of the intoxicating aroma that wafts through the air, that tells us about a world that we could have and the person we could be if we just bought their product or just lived like this person does. And we are so saturated with that, and that the melodious tunes run through our head, that it's easy to sort of just slowly, like a fish going to that hook, bite on that hook and go away. That's a fight every day against the ways of the world. Enemy number 5 is the fallen world in which we live. Our culture wants to believe that this world is the most important one and it's supposed to work right. And it doesn't. In spite of shaking our fists at God and saying, what's wrong with you? This is not heaven. It's not the Garden of Eden. We live in what theologians call a fallen world. And coming to grips with that will help you a lot in terms of your expectations. Romans 8:20 says the creation was subjected to frustration. He's not talking about just in general, the mountains or the seas or something. He's talking about that plus people. Frustration is a part of life. Not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope. We know the whole creation, again, not just the physical creation, but people. The whole creation has been groaning. We talked about this last week, the ache in our soul, that inconsolable ache that we will never really get rid of until heaven. And here he uses the word groaning, just that, why can't things be different? Why can't things be better? Why can't we get past this? That kind of groaning. And he illustrates that we know the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. Now, I've never given birth to a child, but I've watched a woman do that 3 times. It was pretty awful. It was awful for her, too. The first time she was pregnant, we go to the Lamaze classes. Do they even do that anymore? Lamaze? Okay. So we're going in there, and there's about 10 couples in this ring, and we're learning to breathe. I think I'm already pretty good on that, But there's the he and the who and and so you're practicing, and I'm sitting here looking around at the other guys in the room sitting on the floor. We're all thinking, man, when can we get out of here and get a beer? But we're good soldiers here. And so we're doing this, and so then they tell you to have a goodie bag. You take the goodie bag, and they tell you all the things you could put in there that your wife might need to distract her from the pain of childbirth. And so I'm a note-taking guy. So I had my paper and pen, and I'm writing everything they're saying. And I went to the store, and I bought everything that we didn't have. And sometimes these goodie bags, it's like this little shopping bag, 3 or 4. I walked in with one of those big green trash bags full of stuff. Dumped it over in the corner of the room, and the nurse thought that there was medical waste or something in there. And so we get in there, and I'm thinking, I'm going to do this right. So I was pulling out all kinds of things, and Mindy's mom was a part of the room. She's in the room helping, and it just seemed like for about 3 hours, no matter what I did, it didn't seem to be the right thing. And then my mother-in-law, Louise, would come over, and she would do something and say something. Mindy would go, oh, And then at some point, I remember when she was really in the midst of, this really labor, it's just the awful contractions that were going on. And I was trying to help her breathe, and I was about this close, to her. And here she was just going like this and, back and forth. And I said, contractions? And she said, no, your breath. I guess that was a distraction. Finally, at one point, she said, Seth, maybe you should go get some coffee. She was right. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly. Here he's talking about Christians. It's not unspiritual to groan. We talked about this last week. That's a picture of reality, the world we live in. We groan inwardly, but that's not the only thing. We wait eagerly. That's hope for our adoption as sons, redemption of our bodies. So those are the 5 enemies that we face, and every day they come at you, and the challenge of this back road is to keep moving forward in spite of these enemies and in spite of how you feel. Sometimes when it seems overwhelming, and sometimes when you just want to give up, or you just want to throw in the towel, or you just want to throw up your hands and say, what's the use? You keep moving. This is what this back road teaches you. Now, there's a passage in Genesis 3. We looked at this on Mother's Day, where after Adam and Eve sinned, God comes to Adam and Eve and Satan, and he gives them what theologians call the curses, and that this world is a different world we lived in. And on Mother's Day, I talked about the curses that God speaks to you ladies about the things that are the most painful in this life. And today, what I'd like to do on Father's Day is go through what did God tell Adam, and by inference, all of us sons of Adam, our world is like, and it is different. Genesis 3:17. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and the dust you will return. Now, the passage where God speaks to women, your deepest pain is going to be relational. But that's not true of what he says to us as men. Now, think about what he's telling Adam. He's talking about the pain of going out into the fields and working the fields, and thorns and thistles, and weeds, and the sweat of your brow in hot days. And I remember the first time I read that, I said, man, I'm glad I'm not a farmer. Then I remembered that Adam was the only man who was alive at that point, and that was his profession. That's where he spent most of his days. And then I realized it's not just farmers and gardeners where this sucks, but life is hard. This is a metaphor of life. The first time I remember feeling this or understanding something of this, I think I was 12 years old. And we were living in Houston, and I wanted to go up to the school to play football on a Saturday. And before I went, my mother said, now, Seth, before you go, you got to weed the front garden. You know, cue eye roll. Okay. I went out there, and it's not a big patch, and so I went through and just kind of, picked up and I was done in about 5 minutes. Off to play football. Well, the next Saturday, I get ready to go play football. She said, before you go, you got to weed the garden. I thought he did that last week. Weeds are back. What do you mean the weeds are back? Go look. I said, how did that happen? And she said, you got to get the roots. You got to dig down a little bit and try to pull up the roots. Cue eye roll. Okay, so I got a bucket, went out there, I tried to pull them up by the roots. It took me, instead of 5 minutes, about 10 minutes off to play football. Week 3, getting ready to go play football, got to go weed the garden. What do you mean I had to go weed? I did that last week, and I got the roots. They're still back. And she handed me a tool with a wooden handle and a long metal shaft with a little fork at the top. She said, you got to go straight down beneath the ground until the handle hits the ground, and then just get a little pop. Then you can pull it up from deeper in the ground. Okay, went out, got my bucket, my little tool, instead of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, took about 15 minutes to weed the garden. You already know what happens on week 4. Back out to do the garden, and all those freaking weeds are back again. Now, what was I learning? I was learning a metaphor for life. And there are 3 words that I think describe this, and they're in your handout, that strike at the heart of every man. The first F is frustration. The sense of frustration. The second one is the sense of failure. And the third one is the sense of futility. And I got a taste of this regarding our front garden during those 4 weeks. That there are some times in life where you think you got a problem solved, and it comes back up again and again and again. And sometimes that's a something that breaks at home, and sometimes it's a relational issue with your spouse or one of your kids or an in-law or somebody at work, and it just doesn't go away, no matter what you give to it. And there's the sense that you send inside is something of, this is just so frustrating, or just this sense of failure, meaning I just don't think I have what it takes to do this, or to fix this, or to make this better. And the last one, the last F, and this is the killer one, is why bother? Why try? I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to coast. I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to take any initiative. I'm just going to be passive and just sit back and just whatever comes, comes. This is the road. This is the back road number 9 that God takes us on. And thankfully, he picks us up on that road. And he says, I'm going to take you along this road. And there's some signposts along the way that I'm going to build into you towards joy number 9. This is on the back side of your handout. Proverbs 24:16. A righteous man falls 7 times and gets up, but the wicked are overthrown by calamity. You would expect him to say the unrighteous man falls, but the righteous man doesn't fall. That's not what he says. It's the righteous man falls, just like the unrighteous man. But what makes a man righteous here is that he gets up again and again and again and again. 7 times he mentions here. Over and over and over again. When I was a kid, my mother bought me for Christmas one year, I think I was about 3 years old, this Bozo the Clown punching bag. Inflatable. And it was about as tall as I was, maybe a little bit taller. And you punch the bag. Now, the first time I did it, I didn't know that if you punch the bag, you're standing right in front of it, it's going to come back and he's going to punch you in the head. And, when you're a 3-year-old, you go toddling over. Kind of made me mad. But I kind of learned to punch him from the side. Then I was the master of Bozo. 2 Corinthians 4:8. We are hard pressed on every side. Meaning no matter what aspect of his life he looks at, he just sees pressure. He sees stress. He says there's just something that's being required of me, and I just don't know if I have what it takes to do that. But notice what he says. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. You hear what victory sounds like there that we just sang about? Not crushed. Not like, wow, I'm feeling like this great hero of the faith. Not crushed. Second one, perplexed. I don't know what to do. I'm over my head, but not in despair. You hear how he defines victory there? Not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Struck down, but not destroyed. Now, the thing that strikes me about this verse and what's so encouraging to me is that for Paul, 2 things that seem at polar ends can coexist inside of us at the same time. It's okay to feel perplexed and wonder, what in the world am I supposed to do? It's okay to feel that. You're going to feel that. But at the same time, he says, but not in despair. It's one of the great things about being a Christian. It's not an either-or thing. Both of these things can coexist at the same time as I'm living my life and as I'm talking to people. Hebrews 10:35 says, do not throw away your confidence. And here, confidence does not mean the feeling of confidence. I rarely feel confident about anything. Rarely feel confident. But I'm to act with confidence. Not the feeling of confidence, but knowing that God can use somebody like me in weakness and not in strength and not as an expert, but he can use my life with other people, whether it's in my home or outside of my home. Because of that, I'm going to act with confidence. Do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere. so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. In just a very little while, he who is coming will come and not delay. I'll be glad when that happens. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, if he says, I'm kind of done, I'll go to work and I'll put in my hours. I'll come home and try to be nice to my wife, and I'll try to talk to my kids every once in a while, and but I'm just gonna kind of sit back and just no. If he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. Shrinking back or moving forward. And then Paul, I love he's in prison about to be executed, and he knows it. And he's finishing up the last few words of the last letter he'll write, 2 Timothy 4, verse 6. I'm already at the point of being sacrificed. The time of my departure has come. Now, every once in a while, probably once a month, I hear about somebody and their bucket list. They've made a bucket list, and they're starting to do their bucket list. Now, I'm not jumping on bucket lists. Maybe a little. A little, yeah. But I wonder if Paul was going to make a bucket list, what would his be? Well, he tells us, verse 7. I have fought the good fight. Meaning, when it's all said and done, and you see my head rolling off the chopping block and blood spurting out, that's what's going to matter to me. I have fought the good fight. And then he said, second, I have finished the race. I'm going to keep moving forward. And then I love the last one. Remember, this is the Apostle Paul. I have kept the faith. That seems like kind of a low bar, doesn't it? For a Christian? For an apostle? He's saying something like this. There are some times when my life has been so difficult, I've been tempted just to chuck the whole thing. But I didn't do it. Moving forward. The challenge for us, particularly men, but not just for men, but for you ladies too, is what God is taking us on this side road of failure, is to keep moving forward. And we keep moving forward, not because we're at a resort and out there playing golf somewhere, but 5 enemies are coming at us. And we are challenged to keep moving toward those. When I think of this, I think of 3 things. I think, Seth, stand up. Face what's in front of you and move. Stand up. Face what's in front of you and move toward relationships, toward responsibilities. Stand. Face up and move. Now, my friend, I mentioned at the beginning of the message, asked me how I kept going. One of the reasons I keep going is because of the quality of hope. I know that one day this life is going to be done. And when it does, when it's finally over, and the times in my life where it seems like I have been through an inferno of suffering or a forest fire will finally be done. And there'll be blue sky again in heaven and mountains. And I can almost smell the pine trees coming from there. The thunderclouds of discouragement, the lightning of despair that sometimes hits me is finally going to be done. And the brightness of the sun will be there the rest of eternity. That keeps me going. And however much long I have. Now, a few years ago, when we were probably at our lowest as parents, this goes back maybe 20 years or so, 25 years, I was really, really down, doobie down, just dragging. Such a struggle for a season of life. And I remember a man who's Elmer, about 10 years older than me at the time, came up to me after everybody had left. We're standing out in the foyer. And he had a son who'd been through a really, really, really awful time in his life. And I knew his son's story, and I knew what he'd been through. And he stood there after everybody left, and he said these words to me, Seth, one day you will smile again. And those words were like the spring water coming down Yosemite Falls to a dry soul. Now, there have been times where I've smiled again. And if you know me, you see that. But there's coming a day when I will never not smile again. Not smile again. Now, until that day comes, I walk around, it seems to me, with an invisible walker. Dependent, leaning in on God. Stand, face, and move. And even the times when I feel like I have nothing of value to give to anybody, the other image I carry with me is a backpack. And the backpack is always attached. Backpack is the life of Christ in me. And if I have nothing else to offer my wife or my kids or my friends or people at work or you, I always have this backpack. Alive, Christ alive in me to offer to other people. Let's pray together. Father, all 9 of our back roads find a certain amount of joy, a certain level of joy made possible because of Jesus Christ. And apart from Jesus Christ, I don't know if any of these 9 messages are even worth coming and listening to. It's the joy that we find in Jesus, defined in the 9 different ways we've looked at, that you are building into us and that one day we will experience through all eternity. I want to ask you this morning, for you, each of you personally, is Jesus Christ the Lord of your life? Does he sit on the throne in your heart? Or is he just kind of off to the side and you're really doing what you want to do? The kind of joy that God wants to build in us, the life that he wants to give to us, is impossible to have if Jesus Christ is sitting over on the side, somebody you talk to whenever you get in trouble. It's only when we come to a place of surrender to him, of our sin nature, and we find the wonder of mercy and forgiveness, the washing of regeneration, the making us a new creature, that we are now set on some roads that lead to joy. Maybe today on Father's Day, 2019, this is your day to do business with God and to say, Lord Jesus, I know that I'm a sinner by nature, and I thank you that you died on the cross for me. And I don't know much about this Christianity thing, but I do know I need you. Come into my life and sit on the throne of my heart. Be the Lord of my life and take me, move me forward into the life that you have for me.